Vit, welcome to Vita Picta. It's a show where we talk about the historical context behind famous paintings. And this is Vercingetorix throws down his arms at the feet of Julius Caesar. It's a mouthful of a title, but it was painted by Lionel Royer in 1899. Lionel himself sounds like a pretty interesting guy. He was clearly a very patriotic Frenchman because he joined the French military before he was even 18. And he fought in the Franco-Prussian War. As a soldier, he would be recognized for his artistic talents by a general who actually offered to pay for his studies. So he would use that money, go on to art school, and then later paint famous scenes in French history. And this one just absolutely nails the vibe of what this scene must have been like. In the painting, the guy in the red is Julius Caesar, and this is before he became the dictator of Rome. This is a part of his life that is generally pretty frowned upon, to put it lightly, even having been described as the Celtic Holocaust in a phenomenal podcast by Dan Carlin. The location of this scene is called Gaul, which is what the Romans called modern-day France. The people that lived there were grouped into tribes, and at the time that this takes place around the 1st century BC, they were all in the process of being wiped out by Caesar and his legions of Romans. Caesar wanted to pacify and turn Gaul into like a Roman province. Ancient historians said that in the process, he killed 1 million people and enslaved another 1 million. Those are probably exaggerations, but the real numbers are definitely huge. And as this is going on, the other guy in the painting, named Vercingetorix, put up a resistance. Kind of a crazy horse of ancient France kind of way, he created a confederation of these Gallic tribes that would fight against Caesar and threaten the whole operation. Vercingetorix is supposed to have been a very inspiring and formidable leader. In a speech that he had supposedly given to the heads of the tribes that supported him, he laid out what the realistic options facing the Gallic people were. And he said, quote, "You may think these measures harsh and cruel, but you must admit that it would be a harsher fate still to have your wives and children carried off into slavery and to be killed yourselves, which is what will inevitably befall you if you are conquered." End quote. So Vercingetorix and his men carry out this resistance, and it's centered around basically disrupting Caesar's supply lines and trying to force him to leave their territory. The Romans would survive this and actually lay waste to some Gallic cities that were in resistance. And the final showdown would happen when the two forces met at the town of Alesia, which is near modern-day Dijon. Alesia was famous for its defenses. It was a city perched up on basically a hill, and it made it very difficult to siege the city. So when Caesar showed up with his legions, he decided to just build a wall around the town and try to starve out Vercingetorix and his rebels inside the city. The problem with this strategy for Caesar was that there were actually more Gallic warriors outside the city than inside, so he actually had to keep them at bay too. He resolved this by building a second wall, this one facing outwards, and that was supposedly 14 miles long. Eventually, Vercingetorix and his Gauls were on the brink of starving to death, and they broke out of the city and charged at Caesar's defensive lines. And at the same time, the Gauls on the outside of the city charged and broke through where they could too. Details in the battle are pretty sparing, but we do know that Caesar was able to maneuver his legions in a way that he was able to beat back both of the opposing forces of Gauls, and he won the day. After recognizing defeat, Vercingetorix addressed his men saying, quote, "I did not undertake the war for private ends, but for the cause of national liberty. And since I must now accept my fate, I place myself at your disposal. Make amends to the Romans by killing me or surrendering me alive as best you think." End quote. So the moment in this painting is when Vercingetorix surrenders to Caesar. The resistance was over, and these lands that were, being fought over are going to be brought into Roman control and occupation as a province. Effectively, this begins the written history of France. Now, we know all of this because Caesar wrote a book, which is titled The Conquest of Gaul. And he wrote it in the third person, which is, makes it a very weird read, but it is incredible. But I do think it's important to point out because the versions of these events are at least one-sided and maybe even pure propaganda. In Royer's painting, he shows Vercingetorix wearing trousers and having a mustache, which were things that the Romans specifically called out as being barbaric. They didn't even have a word for mustache. The Romans just called it like a hairy upper lip. In the background of the painting, the Romans look down on Vercingetorix with contempt, and the barbaric Gaul rides in on a majestic white horse, and he drops this insanely huge weapon. Royer is clearly taking the view that Vercingetorix had the moral high ground here, and he presents him as a martyr. After this event, Vercingetorix would be brought back to Rome and paraded through the streets in a triumph. He would die in Rome shortly afterwards. Caesar, on the other hand, would turn around and plunge Rome into a bloody civil war that would last many years and end up with him becoming dictator for life. By that point in time, the Roman Republic would be over, and the Roman Empire and Pax Romana and all that would ensue. Caesar would be famously killed by the Senate in 44 BC about 10 years after this event took place. Thank you so much for watching to the end. I hope you had some fun and learned something. If you want to see more, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.